Lin stepped into the spider lair dungeon once. Lin stepped into the spider lair dungeon once again. Lin silently observed his level and current experience. He was on the verge of leveling up, and would require just one more run to level up. After defeating the Spider King, Lin finally reached level 20. However, considering the requirement to join the Creators Academy was level 30, he felt he still had a long way to go. Reaching level 20 was just the beginning. Leveling up would only get tougher. Lin wondered if his abilities would evolve again, remembering the transformations at level 10. A quick glance at his skills and attributes confirmed his expanded summoning space of 200. Yet, Soul Flame, Corpse Explosion, and Slow Curse remained mostly unchanged. However, a newfound excitement bubbled within him, as he could now summon Silver Skeletal Warriors. Upon reaching level 20, the Skeletal Warriors had upgraded from Bronze level to Silver level. Lin immediately summoned a Silver level Skeletal Warrior, only to find that it now required 500 Spirit Points. Suddenly, a Silver armored Skeletal Warrior stood before him. It was slightly bigger than the Bronze level, and radiated a silvery gloss. The large sword in its hand had also become sharper, no longer rusty and ragged as before. The attributes of the Silver level Skeletal Warrior were exceptionally high, with all 4 attributes astonishingly reaching 4,000. Its attribute could even compare to the most dungeon boss at Lin's level. Lin was also surprised to see its skills had also upgraded. Now the Rampage Strike could inflict 300% damage to the target. Lin sat down and started brainstorming. If summoning one Silver level Skeletal Warrior requires 500 Spirit Points, Lin wondered how long it would take to fill his entire summoning space. Reflecting on his somewhat outdated gear, Lin decided to acquire some new equipment. He also planned to sell the gear and equipment he obtained in exchange for some skill scrolls. Lin strode out of the dungeon, causing the bell to echo through the hall. The onlookers were frozen, their eyes glued to the screen displaying Lin's achievements. Leveling up from 17 to 20 in a single day, soloing 2 dungeons and smashing records? Impossible! The whispers buzzed around. Lin, oblivious to the astonished murmurs, teleported out and continued his walk towards the bustling exchange area. Reaching the trading post, Lin unloaded his backpack filled with shimmering silver and bronze equipment. The clerk's jaw dropped, and he was surprised to see a level 20 student with a treasure trove of equipment. Lin's plan was straightforward. Sell the gear for gold coins, then buy every basic skill scroll he could get his hands on. The clerk hesitantly inquired if Lin was sure to sell all silver equipment. Didn't he need the silver equipment himself? Lin had just reached level 20. He was precisely at the right level to use silver equipment. Lin shook his head. Thought to himself, he indeed needed new equipment, but these ordinary silver ones were of little use to him at the moment. The staff member shared that the academy had a special store where treasures traded for points outshone those sold for mere gold coins. Lin's curiosity was piqued, and he followed the staff member into the room. The staff told Lin to browse slowly while he went to sell Lin's equipment. A longsword caught Lin's attention. It was made by a craftsman named Zhang Ti, and to Lin's surprise, it was part of a gear set, seemingly a spiritual set as well. It had no skill bonuses, only the attribute of plus 400 spirits. Among silver-grade weapons, the spirit longsword was somewhat unconventional. For instance, a top-grade silver staff would increase spirit by 200 and amplify mage skills by 15%, offering more practical utility than this spirit sword. Most mages wouldn't choose it. Although the equipment here was excellent, a full set would likely cost tens of thousands of points, which ordinary first-year students couldn't afford. Moving to the next shelf, Lin silently spotted a piece of mage armor called Spirit Robe, and a spirit ring both included 200 spirit points, but no skill bonuses. Checking the crafter's name, it was made by the same person, and was part of the same gear set. Then, Lin checked the set bonus. The Spirit 3-piece set further increased spirit by another 800 points when worn together. For other mages, this set wasn't appealing, but useful to Lin as it maximized spirit attribute. Just as Lin was lost in thoughts, pondering the purchase, a sudden uproar echoed behind him, their eyes fixed on a piece of equipment in the center. The murmurs and exclamations painted the air with a hue of curiosity and disdain. Lin strained his ears. Can you believe it? Someone scoffed. A useless piece of gear with not a single attribute, and they dare to price it at 50,000 points. The surrounding crowd nodded in agreement, their faces mirrored disbelief and scorn. And who, in their right mind, would throw away points on such a worthless thing? Another voice chimed in, lacing the air with chuckles and whispers. Lin meandered toward the commotion, his eyes catching sight of a scythe weapon, its presence dominating the wall. Its handle was a deep, ominous black, contrasting sharply with the azure blade. With a staggering price of 50,000 points, it was a treasure seemingly out of reach for most students in the academy. He closely read the weapon's details. It was the Scythe of Thanatos, a growth-type weapon usable from level 1, and one of the necromancy set. While this weapon had no attributes, it came with 3 skills. Skill Reaper, the Scythe of Thanatos would gain experience as it absorbed souls from the abyssal creatures. The second skill, Whisperer of the Deceased, which would summon the Spirit General. The third skill, Spirit General, Army Formation, allows the Spirit General to inspire and arrange the allied undead summons into battle formations. There was a fourth skill, but was currently locked. Lin's gaze was ensnared by the scythe, his heart thrumming with unspoken excitement. An uncontrollable surge of emotion and desire wells up in his heart. He cannot take his eyes off, observing every detail of this weapon intently, as if he is already holding this weapon in his hands. It seems like this is the arrangement of destiny. This scythe seemed like it was inherently tied to his profession, like it was a weapon exclusively meant for him. In the eyes of others, this attributeless weapon was trash, but perhaps in his hands, this weapon had a new meaning. He thought back to the abyssal demons he had encountered before, and if he could slay them and absorb their souls to level up the weapon, it was exactly what he wanted. The staff had just converted Lin's trove of silver equipment into a cascade of basic skill scrolls. Lin pulled out his card, informing the staff he wanted to buy the scythe on the wall. The staff blinked in disbelief, his voice laced with concern, questioning if Lin was certain about the purchase. He thought Lin had misread the price. Lin shook his head, assured him he hadn't, preparing to pay by card. After swiping, the staff realized that Lin had 130,000 points on his card, more than enough to purchase this scythe. Lin, cradling the scythe, exited the exchange under the watchful, bewildered eyes of the staff. This scythe, who knew how long it had waited in the exchange, had finally found its master. Returning to his dorm, Lin first stowed away the scythe. There was no opportunity to seek abyssal demons for now. He planned to awaken some new skills with the scrolls first. Lin silently took out a basic skill scroll, subsequently activating it. The scroll transformed into a sphere of light, enveloping Lin. Moments later, the light dispersed. The first scroll had failed as an expected outcome since it wasn't a guaranteed thing. Lin picked up another scroll, and the sphere of light illuminated once more, transforming into a streak of radiance that burrowed into his body. Acquired skill, Skeleton Armor. Its description was as follows. Skeletal Armor summons a skeletal armor providing 100 points of vitality and defense, and simultaneously increases both the user and summoned creature's resistance to elemental attacks by 10% for a duration of 5 minutes. This skill can also be applied to others. This was a defensive skill, compensating for Lin's only weakness. Under the talent amplification, this skill could grant Lin 1,000 points of vitality and defense, and resistance to elemental attacks by 50%. Lin silently raised his palm, and used the newly acquired skill, and not long after a layer of white armor composed of bones covered his body. Lin could move freely, the armor did not hinder his movements. Moreover, the armor was as light as a feather. If he didn't see it with his own eyes, he wouldn't even feel it. After a brief test, a smile appeared at the corner of Lin's lips. He was happy with the new skill. He then activated other skill scrolls again. Most of them failed. As more skills he obtained, the failure rate of the skill scrolls also increased. Soon, another sphere of light enveloped Lin just like before. Skill acquired. Summon Skeletal Mage. The skill simply read as Summon Skeletal Mage, summons a black iron level Skeletal Mage. Lin immediately used the skill. A small black vortex appeared beside Lin, and subsequently, a Skeletal Mage walked out. The black iron level Skeletal Mage was tattered all over, reminding Lin the first time he had summoned his first Skeletal Warrior. Lin checked the Skeletal Mage's attributes. The base attributes were not high, and after talent amplification, besides 300 points in spirit, other attributes were only 100, but it also had a skill, Bursting Flame. The skill inflicts fire elemental damage to the target. The damage is determined by the Skeletal Mage's spirit points. The black iron Skeletal Mage, only at level 1, didn't seem impressive, but it provided Lin's skeletal army with a means of long-range attack. As long as he could level up this skill, the Skeletal Mage would become increasingly powerful. Finally, Lin had used up all the basic skill scrolls. Although he only acquired 2 skills, he was quite pleased. He once again entered meditation to recover. Early next morning, Lin decided it was the moment to seek White Divine and inquire about the mission. Upon arriving at White Divine's office, White Divine inquired if there was anything Lin needed. Lin calmly replied that he had reached level 20. White Divine, who was enjoying his early morning tea, showed a slight surprise. White Divine was quite surprised to hear Lin reaching level 20 in just one day. This was even faster than White Divine back in his days. White Divine smiled, thinking to himself that these two siblings are truly something else. White Divine stayed silent for a while. Then with a smile he said the mission was quite simple. He needed Lin to retrieve something for him. White Divine told Lin that within the dungeon hall, there was a large 40-person dungeon raid named the Tyrant Desert. Lin's task was to enter the Tyrant Desert and bring back the heart of the Tyrant. The Tyrant Desert was a large-scale level 25 dungeon, allowing up to 40 people to team up, and Lin should understand the difficulty himself. White Divine gave Lin 3 days to bring back the heart of the Tyrant. If successful, White Divine promised to arrange a primary cooldown amulet for Lin. Lin nodded, saying he understood the task. Before entering the dungeon hall, he had a strong urge for the cooldown amulet, but now, he could simply spend some points in the dungeon hall to reset the cooldown time, so it seemed that there was no need for the cooldown amulet. White Divine noticed the look in Lin's eyes, and couldn't help but reveal a mysterious smile, as if he saw through Lin's thoughts. White Divine patiently explained to Lin that the function of the cooldown amulet was immense, something the dungeon hall couldn't compare with. Although there were many dungeons in the dungeon hall, they weren't the best ones, and there were no top-level dungeons. Some top-level dungeons even had a cooldown time of up to a month. That's when the cooldown amulet would come in handy. Lin felt that a primary cooldown amulet probably couldn't be used in top-level dungeons, but White Divine said that all advanced cooldown amulet is upgraded from the lowest tier ones. Once Lin completes the mission, not only he will give Lin a primary cooldown amulet, but also teach him the method to upgrade the cooldown amulet. Lin hadn't expected that cooling amulets could be upgraded, but he was looking forward to it. Lin accepted the task. Before leaving, White Divine patted Lin's shoulder, explaining that he was given 3 days because the academy would be holding the opening ceremony in 3 days, and White Divine hoped that Lin would not be late. Lin nodded, bowed, and said his farewells, and then left the room. Meng Anwen came out from behind the door and looked at White Divine, noticing that he seemed very interested in this youngster. White Divine, with a smile, told Meng Anwen that he was more and more satisfied as he observed Lin. This young man was calm and composed, exactly to his liking. He then informed Meng Anwen about the task he had given to Lin. Meng Anwen thought that, given Lin's character, he would likely not spend time forming a 40-member raid party, and would surely go solo. Just thinking of a level 20 student soloing a large-scale dungeon made the corners of Meng Anwen's mouth twitch slightly, remembering that White Divine had done the same when he was young. He then laughed and mentioned that White Divine, at level 30, entered the Tyrant Desert alone, and rolled out from it in a very embarrassing manner. White Divine coughed awkwardly a couple of times, and looked out of the window again, stating that Lin was much stronger than he was back in his day. At the grand entrance of the dungeon hall, the atmosphere was still lively and bustling. The arrival of Lin immediately drew the attention of many. As he walked toward the crystal ball, all the students inside the dungeon hall were wondering which dungeon Lin was going to challenge next. Lin slowly approached the entrance to the Tyrant Desert dungeon, and noticed that the current dungeon record was held by the Flying Dragon 40-member squad. It was completed in 16 hours, 45 minutes, and 18 seconds, 4 years ago. Lin knew that the Flying Dragon squad should be on the same level as the Hidden Dragon squad. At this moment, Harmony approached Lin from behind. Lin greeted her, and Harmony asked if he was looking at the information for the Tyrant Desert dungeon. Harmony looked at Lin and thought, Lin had already fought in so many dungeons yesterday. Why doesn't Lin take a break? Lin had some questions in his mind and told Harmony that he needed the Heart of the Tyrant, an item found in the Tyrant Desert dungeon. Harmony explained in detail that the Heart of the Tyrant is an item that only drops from the final boss in the Tyrant Desert dungeon. It is the primary ingredient for crafting the boss jewelry, the Tyrant necklace. The Heart of the Tyrant only drops once a year, and it had already been 2 years since the last one dropped. Harmony looked at Lin again, asking if he was really going to challenge the Tyrant Desert. Lin was just at level 20, and where were his teammates? A few seconds later she covered her mouth in surprise. Could Lin possibly be planning to tackle the large-scale dungeon solo? Harmony spoke with concern, informing Lin that this dungeon is extremely difficult. Harmony knew Lin was strong, but she also didn't want to see him get hurt. Lin sincerely thanked Harmony. Generally people wouldn't share so much. Lin smiled and told her not to worry. As he was about to enter, a haughty voice suddenly sounded from behind, telling them not to block the way. Lin, with quick reflexes, pulled Harmony aside. A knight in full armor with a menacing look walked over. If not for Lin's swift action, he might have bumped into Harmony. Many people followed behind him. The leading knight was very tall, and most of the people were clad in golden tier equipment. He ignored Lin and Harmony walking straight in front of the entrance, and then proudly raised his hands, loudly telling his party members and everyone present in the dungeon hall that they, the 100-mile squad, were going to conquer the Tyrant Desert dungeon today, and were sure to set a new record. Dozens echoed loudly, and their morale was high. The knight told his team to get ready, and that no mistakes were allowed. Lin watched them, thinking that he had to act quickly. Then, he walked into the dungeon entrance. Suddenly, the entire dungeon hall burst into excitement. Very few believed that Lin could solo the dungeon. Most thought it was a bit risky. The leading knight noticed Lin and looked at him disdainfully. A level 20 dares to enter the Tyrant Desert? Clearly a fool who knows nothing about large-scale dungeons. As the people in the dungeon hall focused their attention on the newbie rather than on them, there was a moment when all the members of the 100-mile squad felt somewhat embarrassed. Noticing the shift in morale, the knight knew he couldn't wait any longer. He shouted loudly, "Ignore that reckless newbie! Everyone prepare to enter the dungeon!" Inside the dungeon, hot winds blew, whipping up vast clouds of yellow sand. The burning sun overhead, with scorching sunlight, and the continuously rising temperature all indicated the harshness of the environment. Considering this was a large-scale dungeon, and the record stood at almost 17 hours, Lin surmised its map must be immensely large. With the sun directly overhead not moving a single bit, offering no directional guidance, Lin couldn't discern his location. He had no choice but to find his own way. Without wasting any time, hordes of skeletal warriors began to rise from the ground, sprinting in all directions. A map simultaneously formed in his mind. Seizing this moment, Lin calculated that entering a large dungeon required 500 points, and a reset required 2,000 points. His remaining 80,000 or so points wouldn't last long at this rate. As he contemplated this, a warning from one of the skeletal warriors jolted him. The skeletal warrior has encountered an enemy. Out of the desert sands, a withered branch suddenly sprang up and entangled a skeletal warrior. Following that, a massive tree burst out from the sand. The tree stood tall at 10 meters, with innumerable dry branches. As soon as it emerged, it began whipping the skeletal warriors furiously. It was a level 25 super-enhanced elite monster, the Desert Ghost Tree, with exceptionally high attributes. Lin marveled at its stats, thinking that the large-scale dungeons truly stood out, where even a regular monster could rival boss-level monsters in other dungeons. If it weren't for the recently upgraded silver-level skeletal warriors, dealing with the tree would have been somewhat strenuous. Several silver-level skeletal warriors were incessantly chopping away. Soon, a system prompt appeared. Killed level 25 Desert Ghost Tree, XP gained 300,000. Not only were its attributes boss level, but so were the experience points it gave. If killing one granted 300,000 experience points, what about all the other monsters inside the dungeon? Lin might have just stumped onto a true heaven of experience. Lin, after all, didn't know how dangerous this dungeon really was. For safety's sake, Lin summoned skeletal armor and the Scythe of Thanatos. He ordered the skeletal warriors to continue exploring in all directions, while he followed the paths they had traversed. 2 hours later, standing on a sand dune, Lin saw an oasis. The appearance of an oasis in the desert inevitably signified danger. This could very likely be where most of the monsters congregated. Just as a skeletal warrior rushed to the edge of the oasis, a multitude of scorpion-like creatures suddenly leaped out of the sand. Each giant scorpion was over 2 meters tall, and including the tail, exceeded 5 meters in length. Their tails bore massive venomous stingers, making them appear very ferocious and horrifying. Lin remained completely calm, standing on the dune and commanding his skeletal warriors. Employing a detection spell, he found these were level 25 giant oasis scorpions, their attributes comparable to the previous ghost tree. After several minutes of battle, the skeletal warriors finally ended the fight with a rampage strike. The system prompted, killed level 25 giant oasis scorpion, XP gained 300,000. More giant oasis scorpions were already approaching. From afar, Lin saw some fruits hanging on the trees. He then summoned all the skeletal warriors, having one to grab the fruits while the rest provided cover. Quickly, the skeletal warriors brought the fruit to Lin. Lin observed the fruit carefully, wondering if this very fruit was the reason why the giant scorpion had gathered here. He checked the information of the fruit. It was a desert fruit, which could rapidly restore a substantial amount of spirit points when consumed, but would become ineffective 5 minutes after being picked. Lin took a bite, and found the taste quite pleasant. His spirit points had already been consumed by more than half, but after eating the desert fruit, his spirit points began to recover rapidly. Seeing the tree full of fruits, Lin had a good feeling about this. He immediately summoned skeletal mages. This oasis became an excellent location for Lin to level up his skills. Lin began to summon more skeletal mages. After his spirit points were all used up, he'd consume one desert fruit and repeat the process. Skeletal mages kept appearing and quickly disappearing. He hoped to level up his newly obtained summon skill to level 20 here, so he could summon silver-level skeletal mages. 3 hours later, Lin's summoning speed had slowed down. Only a few desert fruits were left, and he had successfully leveled up his skeletal mage summoning skill to level 20. Lin inspected the attributes of the skeletal mage, and his eyes shone with satisfaction. Standing before him was no longer the initial black iron level skeletal mage, but a silver-level ice element skeletal mage. The mage had spirit points as high as 8,000, but its other attributes were at 2,000. The skeletal mage was covered in ice, and cold light shimmered in its bony hands. It also had a new skill, Ice Storm. Allow the skeletal mage to create an ice storm within a certain range, inflicting ice elemental damage to all targets in range. The damage will scale with the skeletal mage's spirit points. Eating the last few desert fruits, Lin continued to summon several silver-level skeletal mages. The attributes of the summoned skeletal mages were the same, but the elements are random, and in the end, he summoned fire, wind, and thunder element skeletal mages. The fire and thunder element skeletal mages dealt single target damage, while the ice and wind element skeletal warriors had AoE skills. Looking at the scorpions ahead that had just slaughtered all the black iron skeletal mages, it was time for the skeletal mages to take their revenge.